The head of the Tokyo Olympics has resigned over sexist remarks that sparked an outcry. That leaves the event in a major crisis with just 5 months to go before the Games kick off. Protests have entered a 7th day in Myanmar. 350 people have now been arrested by the authorities since last week's military coup. Meanwhile, the UN Human Rights Council has warned against sanctions that would target the people of Myanmar. We'll hear more on all of that from Philip Sherwell, who's following events for us in the region. And you just heard him there, the legendary jazz musician Chick Corea has died. Corea was described as a pioneer and virtuoso on the keyboard who broadened the scope of jazz during a career spanning 5 decades. We'll bring you more on his life and times later on. Thanks for watching. I'm James Creedon. Now, the Tokyo 2020 Olympics chief, Yoshiro Mori, resigned on Friday and again apologised for sexist remarks that triggered a global outcry. Mori is a former Prime Minister. His departure from the Summer Games Committee is the latest blow after the event was postponed last year. Let's take a listen to him speaking to the media earlier.
今回私の不適切な発言が原因で大変混乱をいたしてしまいました。理事の皆さん、さらには評議員の皆様、そして多くの皆様方に大変ご迷惑をおかけをいたしましたことを誠に申し訳なく存じております。
Now, this has put a spotlight on patriarchal attitudes in Japan. Earlier, I spoke to Michael Penn, who's following events for us in Tokyo. I asked him, how true is it that there's a problem with misogyny in Japanese society? Let's take a listen.
Sad to say, this was sort of no accident or an accident waiting to happen, you might say, because almost every sort of measure or survey of gender equality internationally puts Japan very, very low. So, for example, one survey on gender equality, which comes out every year, has Japan ranked about 121st out of 153 surveyed countries, by far the lowest in the G7 among rich countries, and even low even by the measure of many developing countries. And that includes things such as the number of women represented in business executive positions, the number of women represented in the parliament and the diet. So really, pretty much across the board, Japan is sort of the land that time forgot on gender equality issues in many ways. And so the fact that this happened here and happened in this way is really not terribly surprising. Japan has a serious problem with this issue.
The UN Human Rights Council is holding a special session in Geneva as we speak to discuss the crisis in Myanmar. This after Washington announced sanctions on the generals last week, rather the coup that took place last week. One of the investigators of the UN has said that there are growing reports and photographic evidence that security forces have used live ammunition against protesters in violation of international law. Meanwhile, the Deputy UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Nada al-Nashif, has warned against sanctions that would affect the people of Myanmar. Let's take a listen to her.
To the international community, I express my concern that any sanctions under consideration should be carefully targeted against specific individuals who are credibly alleged to have violated people's rights. Leaders of this coup are an appropriate focus of such actions. It is of critical importance that no harm should be inflicted on the most vulnerable people in the country, and that assistance to help fight the pandemic can continue alongside humanitarian support in conflict areas.
Now, for more on that, we can cross now to the Asia correspondent for the Sunday Times, Philip Sherwell. Philip, lots of activity in Geneva today at the UN over events in Myanmar. China, notably, has just given its reaction. Tell us more about that.
Yes, well, China, and just following on from Russia, have struck very similar notes. They've said that the Human Rights Council should not be investigating or looking into what they describe as an internal matter. They've said that the international community is actually whipping up problems in Myanmar, and they have sort of firmly come down on the sort of line that the world should stay out of things. In fact, Russia has even called for support for this new government rather than sort of criticism and opprobrium. So you're seeing these diplomatic lines being drawn because other speakers from European countries, but a number of African countries, some Latin American ones too, have taken very strong lines of condemning what's happening there. So there is a sort of a clear diplomatic divide, but the generals in Myanmar will be very relieved, although they will have also been fairly confident that their staunch allies in Beijing and in Moscow are fighting their corner. And this also signals that when these sorts of issues come up at other UN forum, where maybe sort of sanctions are debated, that China and Russia will block those. Now, there is a very important point to be made here. America has just imposed sanctions on military leaders and on 3 military companies that are making huge fortunes out of jade and rubies in northern Myanmar. But as that clip that you ran said, there's a very clear point being made that sanctions can't be blanket and they can't hit an impoverished country. So it's very difficult, though, when the military is so dominant in terms of business, to actually separate out how you hit the military without hitting the people too.
Okay, and meanwhile, we've been seeing huge crowds thronging cities around Myanmar, Philip, to demand the return of Aung San Suu Kyi. It's the 7th consecutive day of protests. There was also, we saw a flag-raising ceremony today to hold, I think that's marking the 74th Union Day in Myanmar. And it's a symbol, isn't it, of unity and independence, the 12th of February every year. So give us a sense of what's been happening today in Myanmar. You had those formal ceremonies and also the protests.
Well, that's the very stark divide, isn't it? I mean, in Naypyidaw, in the capital, the military have been attending the flag raising. As you say, Union Day is actually marking the day when Aung San Suu Kyi's father, General Aung San, who was the independence hero of Myanmar, reached an agreement with some of the ethnic groups to try and establish a peaceful federation or federal state. That has never happened. Myanmar has had civil wars for 70 years since independence. But you had the generals nonetheless honouring this day. And then on the streets of the largest city, Yangon, you had the biggest protests yet. I mean, because today's a public holiday, people are free and and available, and they are out there. Now, we have seen a lot lighter security force presence in Yangon today. That may well be because the military didn't want to see a split screen between clampdowns in Yangon while the diplomats are meeting in Geneva. But we've also, though, heard that the raids are continuing, that away from the TV cameras, that officials are being raided and arrested. And very significantly, some people who worked for the Election Commission have been arrested. And they're under huge pressure to say that the last election in November, which Aung San Suu Kyi's NLD won by a landslide, was indeed the result of electoral fraud. They seem to be preparing to try and build a case that the NLD did swindle this election. Now, observers and the Election Commission previously have said that there may have been some irregularities in the voter lists, but this was an overwhelming victory for the NLD. So very alarming if those same officials are now under pressure with metaphorical guns to their heads to sign pieces of paper saying that there was fraud.
Philip Sherwell, thank you for that analysis in Bangkok. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
To Australia next, where a sudden lockdown was imposed on the city of Melbourne and the whole state of Victoria that affects 6 million residents of the state. That's going to last for 5 days from today, Friday, and it's in a bid to contain a new coronavirus outbreak. The Australian Open tennis tournament in Melbourne has been required to shut fans out, the latest blow to that particular sporting event in the context of the pandemic. And the decision is a setback for residents and businesses across the state. They already underwent a similar lockdown in and around Melbourne for more than 100 days late last year. Now, despite promises to increase equality in the United States after last summer's Black Lives Matter movement, Black Americans say many of them are being left behind in the COVID-19 vaccination drive. According to a recent study, African Americans have been vaccinated far less than white Americans. Little has been done to increase access to immunisation in disadvantaged neighbourhoods where the majority of essential workers live. And many there remain sceptical about the vaccine. Our correspondents in California tell us more.
In South Central Los Angeles, this psychiatric clinic has been reborn as a massive vaccination center.
Okay, you okay? Yeah. Okay, all right, this is our vaccine.
African Americans are twice as likely to succumb to COVID-19. To help save lives, nurses are vaccinating up to 2,000 people a day.
Really expecting expiring doses from nursing homes to come. We just like, give me some vaccine, and they look in the freezer and they're like, fine. But that's vaccine that needs to go somewhere else too.
Nationwide, Black Americans have so far received only 5% of vaccines, despite making up 20% of essential workers in the country.
I'm a healthcare worker, so it makes me feel a lot safer knowing I can go to work knowing I have the second vaccine now.
The nationwide inoculation campaign has another hurdle: overcoming mistrust by African Americans towards professional health care. Due to the pandemic, this Protestant church is now empty. Services are broadcast live on local radio, and the Reverend Walden half-heartedly urges worshipers to get vaccinated.
My brothers and sisters, we believe in God, but we also believe in the reality of science.
More than a third of Black Americans are not considering getting vaccinated, a reluctance towards science that's rooted in history. They fear they may once again be researchers' guinea pigs.
The skepticism is real, science is real, but also history is real.
Many African Americans recall the Tuskegee experiment, which purposefully left Black Americans with syphilis untreated until the 1970s. Spiritual leaders in this religious community now have a heavy task to accomplish: to restore faith in science.
Now, day 3 of Donald Trump's second impeachment trial concluded in the US Senate on Thursday. The former president is charged with incitement of insurrection over comments he made, allegedly encouraging his supporters to storm Capitol Hill on the 6th of January. Senators have been hearing testimony that the rioters believed Trump specifically told them to enter the Capitol and stop the certification of Joe Biden's election victory. Catherine Viette has more.
Trump told us to do it. That's the argument Democrat House impeachment managers are laying out in day 3 of the trial. The team shared social media, recorded video, and court documents to draw a direct line between Donald Trump's words and the crowd's actions to storm the U.S. Capitol.
You don't have to take my word for it that the insurrectionists acted at Donald Trump's direction. They said so. They were invited here. They were invited by the President of the United States.
We were invited here!
The impeachment case rests on proving that Trump knew his words would incite his supporters to violence. Using his speeches and tweets, the team argued Trump spent months laying the groundwork for a confrontation by repeatedly saying the election was rigged and his victory was stolen. The Democrats pointed to Trump's defiance as proof he knew what would happen.
President Trump's lack of remorse and refusal to take accountability during the attack shows his state of mind. It shows that he intended the events of January 6th to happen. And when it did, he delighted in it. He was asked by a reporter, quote, "What is your role in what happened at the Capitol? What is your personal responsibility?"
So if you read my speech, and many people have done it, it's been analyzed, and people thought that what I said was totally appropriate.
Up next are Trump's lawyers, who will have 16 hours to lay out their defense. Trump has already said he won't testify.
Now, jazz legend Chick Corea has passed away. The 79-year-old died of a rare form of cancer, according to a statement posted on his Facebook page. Now, Corea is considered one of the pioneers of jazz fusion, someone who revolutionized electric piano en route to winning more jazz Grammys than any other artist. Cole Stangler takes a look back at his soaring career.
One of the most visionary piano players in the history of jazz, Chick Corea explored the intricacies and boundaries of the genre in a career that saw him pick up a stunning 23 Grammy Awards. He played with Miles Davis in the 1960s, contributing to a couple of legendary jazz fusion records, before forming his own group in the early 70s, Return to Forever. Mixing acoustic and electric instrumentation, with a Latin American influence. Over his towering career, Correa collaborated with other jazz greats like Herbie Hancock, Keith Jarrett, Stanley Clarke, and Bela Fleck. But his influence also extends into hip-hop, with his fusion records providing a wide supply of rap samples. In a final message posted on his Facebook page, Correa thanked his friends and fans.
It is my hope that those who have an inkling to play, write, perform, or otherwise do so, if not for yourself, then for the rest of us. It's not only that the world needs more artists, it's also just a lot of fun.
Correa already has more jazz Grammys than any other artist. The next month, he's up for 2 more awards.
All right, that's all from me for now. Thanks for watching France 24.